Havana, Cuba, 1999. 2 blocks from the Ministry of Interior, Cuban intelligence officers relaxed in a small cigar shop called La Habana Tradicional. They talked freely, they laughed, they trusted the men behind the counter. But the shop was never Cuban. Behind a humidor wall, microphones fed encrypted traffic into a system known internally as Project CARBONADO. Every customer photo was cataloged. Every voice was mapped. For 7 years, Cuba's security elite unknowingly walked into an American listening post, until counterintelligence began closing in. This is the story of how the CIA turned a Havana cigar shop into a spy operations center, and how close it came to catastrophe. Operation CARBONADO. By the late 1990s, the Cold War was officially over. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The Soviet Union had collapsed. But between Washington and Havana, nothing had ended. Cuba's Ministry of Interior, known by its Spanish acronym MIN&T, still treated the CIA as an existential threat. U.S. intelligence viewed Cuba as one of the world's most aggressive counterintelligence environments. The mutual paranoia had not thawed. It had concentrated. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba became poorer, but more paranoid. The island lost its primary sponsor. Economic crisis gripped the nation during what Cubans called the special period. But the security apparatus never weakened. Human intelligence mattered more than ever. Electronic surveillance was aggressive. Traditional CIA stations were compromised quickly. American diplomats were monitored from the moment they landed at Jose Marti International Airport. What made this environment uniquely dangerous and uniquely valuable was density. Cuban military officers, diplomats, and intelligence handlers lived, worked, and socialized within a few square miles of central Havana. They smoked cigars together. They talked shop over rum. They relaxed in routine. The geographic compression of Cuba's power structure meant that proximity to one target often meant proximity to dozens. But that same compression made infiltration nearly impossible. Everyone knew everyone. Strangers stood out. Foreign accents were noticed. That routine became the vulnerability. The CIA's defining skill in this operation was what analysts called deniable proximity, getting as close as possible to targets without looking like intelligence at all. The challenge was finding a cover that Cuban officials would not just tolerate, but embrace. Something that felt authentically Cuban. Something that invited conversation without raising suspicion. The operation was justified under classic non-official cover doctrine, what the CIA calls no-see operations. Intelligence officers operating without diplomatic protection, embedded in civilian life, with no embassy safety net. Previous attempts using diplomats had failed catastrophically. Communications were compromised, assets were burned. Diplomatic cover provided legal protection, but operational blindness. Everyone watched the diplomats. This time, planners chose a different approach. A static collection hub disguised as something culturally invisible. The idea came from a retired case officer who had worked Havana in the 1980s. He observed that Cuban officials trusted spaces that reflected national pride. They relaxed in environments that celebrated Cuban identity. Cigars were ritual, not risk. A cigar shop near Minant would attract exactly the right clientele. Scrutiny would paradoxically be lower because of proximity to power. Who would be foolish enough to run an intelligence operation 2 blocks from Cuba's security headquarters? The logic was brutal and simple. Cuban officials would assume that any legitimate threat would maintain distance from Minant. They would assume that surveillance focused outward, not inward. They would assume that a small shop catering to their tastes was beneath notice. Every assumption would be weaponized. Obstacles were immense. Importing surveillance equipment undetected meant bypassing customs officers trained to spot anomalies. Building credible Cuban identities required years of legend construction. Maintaining operational discipline under constant observation meant zero mistakes. One slip, one accent deviation, one incorrect cultural reference, one unexplained absence could trigger investigation. And investigation meant capture. Cuba did not negotiate over espionage cases. The trigger came in late 1998. A Cuban intelligence officer defected through the U.S. Interests section in Havana. During debriefing in Miami, he revealed that senior DGI officers, Cuba's Dirección de Inteligencia, routinely held informal meetings outside secure facilities. They believed secure facilities were monitored by their own internal security, so they talked freely in places they considered safe. Coffee shops, cigar lounges, private clubs. The defector provided addresses. He provided names. He provided a pattern. Planning moved to execution. The proposal went through the National Clandestine Service at CIA headquarters in Langley. Authorization came with restrictions. No lethal action. No recruitment attempts inside the shop. The facility would be strictly passive collection, listening, photographing, mapping networks. The objective was strategic intelligence, not tactical disruption. Burn the operation by being aggressive, and you lose the entire network map. Patience was the operational requirement. 2 deep cover officers were selected from a pool of NOC candidates with fluent Spanish and extended Latin American experience. Both were second-generation Cuban Americans. Both had operated in denied areas before. Their covers were built over 5 years, starting in 2004. Tax records were created in Spain, showing legitimate business operations. Travel history was constructed through third-country movements. Family grave sites in Cuba were located and documented. Every element of their legends was designed to withstand aggressive counterintelligence scrutiny. By early 1999, both officers were ready. Their cover story was simple. 2 Cuban entrepreneurs who had built a tobacco import business in Spain were returning to Havana to reconnect with their roots. They would open a traditional cigar shop catering to connoisseurs. They would source directly from Cuban farms. They would celebrate Cuban cigar culture. The business would be legitimate enough to turn a modest profit, eliminating financial scrutiny. The profit margin did not matter. The access did. During the preparation phase, one officer experienced what handlers call legend drift. His false identity had become so detailed, so lived in, that moments of his real biography felt distant. In a secure communication sent 3 months before deployment, he described the sensation of forgetting his actual childhood while rehearsing fabricated memories of growing up in Malaga. The psychological assessment noted moderate dissociation, but deemed him operationally functional. The mission continued. The human cost was documented and accepted. They leased a 600-square-foot storefront on Calle Aguiar in Old Havana. The address was deliberately chosen, 312 meters from the main entrance of the Ministry of Interior. Close enough to be convenient for minent personnel, far enough to avoid appearing suspicious. The lease was signed under a shell company registered in Panama. Renovations began in January 1999. The build-out was supervised by a technical services officer rotating through Havana on a Canadian passport. He posed as a contractor specializing in humidity control systems for cigar storage. The cover was functional. Cigars require precise temperature and humidity. Installing environmental controls was expected. What was not expected were the fiber optic cables hidden inside the humidor walls. The back room was constructed as a climate-controlled aging vault for premium cigars. The vault concealed directional microphones, a burst transmission system, and a low-power relay disguised as a television antenna. The surveillance equipment was manufactured specifically for denied area operations. The microphones were Israeli-designed clandestine audio system units, model CAS-4, capable of isolating individual voices in crowded environments. The burst transmitter was a modified Rockwell ATS-4 system, upgraded to use frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology. Data was compressed using proprietary encryption developed by the National Security Agency. The encryption protocol was designated BIRAMS 7. Every technical element was built to operate on battery backup in case of power failure. The shop had one rule for customer interaction: no politics encouraged, but never discouraged. If customers wanted to talk about government policy, the operators listened. If they wanted to discuss internal ministry dynamics, the operators expressed polite interest. The goal was to create a space where Cuban officials felt comfortable enough to forget they were being careful. The team structure was tight. 2 operators inside the shop at all times, 1 logistics officer rotating quarterly via third country travel through Mexico and Canada. All data was compressed and exfiltrated nightly at 0240 hours local time, when Havana's electronic surveillance was focused on diplomatic compounds. The transmission lasted 47 seconds. The frequency changed daily based on a prearranged schedule. If a transmission was missed, the backup window opened at 0415 hours. The shop opened in March 1999. The first week saw modest traffic, local residents, a few tourists. By the second week, a pattern emerged. Cuban officials began stopping in during lunch hours. The operators offered free samples. The cigars were authentic Cohibas and Montecristos, sourced through legitimate channels. Quality built trust. Trust built access. The first breakthrough came in June 1999. A minute colonel began using the back room as a private meeting space. He appreciated the discretion. He appreciated the climate control. He did not appreciate that the room was wired with 6 separate audio feeds. Over the next 8 months, that colonel held 17 meetings in the back room. 9 involved discussion of counterintelligence operations against U.S. personnel in Havana. 3 involved coordination with Russian intelligence officers still operating in Cuba. The intelligence take was categorized as Priority 1. Complications followed. In August 2001, a power surge during a thunderstorm nearly exposed hidden cabling. A section of drywall cracked, revealing fiber optic lines behind the humidor. One of the operators spent 6 hours that night replastering and repainting while his partner kept watch. The repair was completed by 0500 hours. When the shop opened at 1000 hours, no evidence remained. A local building inspector visited 3 days later for a routine check. He lingered near the humidor. He tapped the wall. He asked about the construction. The operator explained that the humidor was custom-built in Spain using traditional methods. The inspector accepted the explanation. He left without filing any concerns. In November 2001, one of the operators was photographed by Cuban surveillance while entering a pharmacy. The photograph was logged in a DGI database as part of routine monitoring of foreign nationals. The operator was misidentified as a Spanish businessman with no intelligence connections. The misidentification held. The operation continued. The execution window widened after September 11, 2001. When the World Trade Center towers fell, Cuban intelligence assessed that U.S. focus had shifted entirely to counterterrorism. They were partially correct. CIA resources were redirected to the Middle East and South Asia. but Operation Carbonado was considered too valuable to shut down. The funding continued, the staffing remained constant, and Cuban officials, believing American attention was elsewhere, grew less careful in their conversations. Between 2002 and 2004, the shop recorded over 1,200 hours of conversations. The tradecraft was subtle. Conversational mirroring kept targets talking. If a customer mentioned family, the operator shared a fabricated story about his own family in Spain. If a customer discussed baseball, the operator demonstrated detailed knowledge of Cuban League statistics. The goal was to create rapport without creating suspicion. Product placement positioned speakers toward microphones. The seating arrangement in the back room was carefully designed. The most comfortable chair faced directly toward a concealed CAS-4 unit embedded in a decorative wooden carving. Customers naturally gravitated to that chair. Their voices were captured with exceptional clarity. Photographs were taken with a modified Minox C camera hidden inside a cigar cutter. The device was activated by a specific cutting motion. A customer would select a cigar. The operator would offer to cut it. The cutting motion triggered a shutter release. The photograph was captured at a resolution sufficient for facial recognition. Faces were logged in a database maintained at a CIA facility in Northern Virginia. Timelines were constructed showing who met with whom and when. The vulnerability being exploited was fundamentally human, routine. The same men visited the shop at the same times. A group of DGI analysts arrived every Thursday at 1400 hours. They occupied the same table. They ordered the same cigars. They discussed the same topics. Current operations, frustrations with bureaucracy, assessments of American intelligence capabilities. Over time, the operators learned their patterns so well that they could predict conversation topics based on recent events. One of the Thursday regulars was a DGI officer responsible for monitoring Cuban dissidents. Intercepted communications from March 2003 captured him discussing his daughter's upcoming quinceañera. He was stressed about the cost. He was concerned about finding a proper venue. Analysts noted nothing operationally relevant in the conversation. The human detail was logged. He was a father worried about disappointing his daughter. When the operation was eventually compromised, that officer was among those disciplined for security failures. The personal cost to his family was not tracked by U.S. intelligence. By early 2005, pattern-of-life analysis revealed a tightening net. Customers who had visited regularly stopped coming. Some returned, but sat silently, observing. Surveillance tails appeared outside the shop. The operators noticed a white Lada sedan parked across the street for extended periods. The occupants changed, but the vehicle remained. In February 2005, a single word began appearing in DGI intercepts, monitored by NSA listening posts. The word was tienda, shop. The context suggested active investigation. On April 17, 2005, at 0830 hours, the shop closed for what the operators announced as routine renovations. They posted a handwritten sign in Spanish thanking customers for their patience. The operators departed Havana separately over the next 72 hours. One traveled through Mexico City, the other exfiltrated via Montreal. Both were out of Cuba within 96 hours of the shop closure. Neither returned. The shop itself remained closed. After 6 months, a different business opened at the same location, a pharmacy. Cuban counterintelligence never publicly acknowledged the operation. No press releases were issued. No diplomatic protests were filed. But internal reviews were conducted. Between May and August 2005, several MNT officers were reassigned to remote posts. 3 DGI analysts were reprimanded for what internal documents called discipline failures. The specifics were not made public, but the pattern suggested awareness of compromise. The Ministry of Interior tightened protocols for informal meetings. Officers were instructed to avoid discussing sensitive matters outside secure facilities. Trust evaporated. The CIA exfiltrated its operators quietly through established channels in Europe. Both officers underwent extensive debriefing at a facility outside Washington. The psychological toll was assessed as moderate to severe. One officer requested reassignment to analytical work. The other left the agency within 18 months. Neither has spoken publicly about the operation. The intelligence take was categorized as historically significant. The operation mapped Cuban intelligence social networks with unprecedented clarity. Analysts identified previously unknown connections between Cuban intelligence, Russian operatives, and Venezuelan officials. The information influenced U.S. policy decisions regarding Cuba for the next decade. But the operation also triggered consequences. Cuban counterintelligence tightened controls that shut down future NOC operations for years. The information gained was substantial. The operational cost was the closure of an entire methodology. What was achieved tactically was undeniable. Over 6 years, Operation CARBONADO collected intelligence that would have required dozens of human assets and hundreds of diplomatic intercepts. The passive collection model proved that proximity could substitute for recruitment. You did not need to turn Cuban officers if you could simply listen to them. The financial cost was relatively modest, approximately $8 million over the operational lifespan, according to declassified budget summaries. The strategic benefit was measured in decision-making advantage. What it cost strategically was trust in a broader sense. After CARBONADO was suspected, Cuban officials became wary of any business catering to government personnel. Cigar shops near government facilities were investigated. Small businesses with foreign ownership faced enhanced scrutiny. The operational methodology that had worked for 6 years became unusable. The agency's ability to operate static collection hubs in denied areas was compromised globally. If Cuba could identify the pattern, other counterintelligence services could as well. The human cost was distributed unevenly. For the CIA operators, the cost was psychological strain and career disruption. For the Cuban officers who trusted the shop, the cost was professional disgrace and damaged careers. For the families of those officers, the cost was economic hardship and social stigma. None of these costs appeared in official assessments. They were externalities to the mission objective. The calculation made by the CIA's National Clandestine Service was that the intelligence benefits outweighed the operational costs. The mapping of Cuban intelligence networks provided strategic advantage during a period when U.S.-Cuba relations were tense but not openly hostile. Whether this assessment proved correct depends on perspective and time horizon. In the immediate term, the intelligence was valuable. In the long term, the methodology became a case study in how successful operations can burn future opportunities. The paradox at the center of Operation CARBONADO is simple but unresolved. Was this precision intelligence collection or a violation of ordinary human trust? From Washington's perspective, this was textbook espionage. No violence occurred. No one was physically harmed. The operation targeted government officials engaged in intelligence work against the United States. The information collected was used to protect American interests. The methods were creative, but not cruel. From Havana's perspective, this was a profound violation of sovereignty and personal trust. Cuban officials were targeted not in their official capacities, but in moments of relaxation. The shop exploited cultural identity. The national pride in cigar craftsmanship to facilitate espionage. The betrayal was not just professional, but personal. Men who thought they were supporting Cuban entrepreneurs were unknowingly feeding American intelligence. The moral question persists. When intelligence operations succeed by exploiting normal life, does it make everyday human behavior a battlefield? Is there a meaningful difference between recruiting a spy and simply listening to people who believe they are safe? The answers reveal more about your worldview than about the operation itself. What is your take on whether espionage that depends on betraying ordinary trust crosses a line that should not be crossed? Or is all intelligence collection inherently an invasion, making the methodology irrelevant? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider where intelligence operations should draw boundaries, hit that like button and share this with someone who appreciates the complexity of the secret world.